He looked me in the eye and said, "We got married yesterday. Only special people were invited." In that moment, the ground beneath me shattered. Years of sacrifice, of silent giving, of believing love was stronger than greed. All of it crumbled with one cruel sentence. The kind of betrayal that doesn't just wound, but carves a scar deep enough to change the way you see family forever. This isn't just a story of broken trust. It's about the fight to reclaim dignity when the people you love most turn you into nothing more than a resource. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I wake before the sun most mornings, when the valley is still covered in a soft gray veil of mist. The old cabin creaks as if reminding me that it too has lived a long life. I shuffle into the kitchen, put the kettle on, and wait for the smell of strong black coffee to fill the air. The ritual has kept me steady for years, grounding me when loneliness has tried to take root. 19 years ago, I lost Linda, my wife, to a sudden illness. The cabin still holds her ghost in the framed photographs and the faint scent of her favorite polish that lingers on the pine floorboards. Every morning, I look at her picture on the mantle and tell myself I've made it through another day. The radio in the corner plays old country songs, the kind Linda loved to hum along with while cooking. Now it's just me and the voice of some disc jockey filling the silence. After breakfast, I head out back to the shed. The smell of sawdust greets me like an old friend. My hands, though worn and marked with scars from decades on the railroad, still know the language of wood. I shape walnut into smooth curves, crafting rocking chairs I donate to the church. It's the one way I still feel connected to a community. People know me as the man who makes chairs, though few know me as much else. What I am best known for in my private life is being Brooke's father. She is my only child, my only family left. Brooke grew up riding trains with me when I still worked the rail lines. I can still remember her hand gripping mine, tiny and warm, as the whistle blew and the engines thundered. Those memories shine brighter than the rest, reminders of when I was a whole man with a whole family. She's grown now, living in Greenville with her partner, Trevor. I rarely see her face in person. Instead, my phone lights up with messages asking for help. Rent due, groceries short, a surprise car repair. Each time, I reach into my wallet or transfer funds from my retirement account. For 3 years, it has been like this. $650 each month for their rent. $4,800 for the used sedan Trevor drives to work, or so he says. I stock their fridge with groceries, sometimes making the trip myself to deliver them. I even furnish their place with couches, lamps, and a dining set they never mentioned to friends as coming from me. Each receipt goes into a manila envelope I keep labeled, "Brooke, help." The stack has grown thick, and the ink is beginning to fade on some of the slips, but I can't bring myself to throw them away. They remind me that I'm still needed, that my daughter's life still rests on my shoulders. Neighbors nod politely when they see me in town, but I keep to myself. I always leave my Sundays free in case Brooke decides to visit. Most weeks she cancels. "Too busy, Dad," she'll text, sometimes with a heart emoji, sometimes with nothing at all. Then I'll open my phone later and see pictures of her in a new dress at some rooftop bar, champagne in hand, Trevor beside her grinning like he owns the world. I swallow the sting and tell myself that's what youth is supposed to look like. She's living, and maybe I'm the one who doesn't understand. Still, the cabin is ready every weekend. I keep the porch light glowing warm, the way I used to when she was a teenager out with friends. Back then, she'd come home and roll her eyes at how overprotective I was. Now, I keep it on for different reasons. It's a beacon, a reminder that her father's house is always open, always waiting. I don't know if she notices or if Trevor teases her about it, but I keep it burning anyway. Some nights, when the fog settles heavy and the coyotes sing from the ridge, I wonder if I've confused my role as a father. Did I give too much? Did I buy her affection instead of building something stronger? Then I push the thoughts away and tell myself that sacrifice is what love demands. A man doesn't raise a daughter to turn his back when she asks for help. I sip my coffee, check my account balance, and remind myself it's worth it. The town around me goes on as always. Main Street fills with tourists on weekends, drawn by the mountain views and the crafts sold at local markets. I pass by with my paper bag of groceries, unnoticed. Sometimes I see couples laughing at cafe tables, and I imagine Brooke and Trevor there, ordering the most expensive thing on the menu, never once thinking about the hands that made it possible. But I keep quiet. I tell myself one day, maybe, Brooke will see me not just as a provider, but as her father again. Until then, I live in the rhythm I've built, the radio, the sawdust, the manila envelopes, and the porch light that never goes out. If you're still watching and feeling the weight of this betrayal, comment number 1 below so I know you're with me. The call began like a dozen others I had made before. I wanted to ask a simple question. The kind fathers have been asking daughters for centuries. When is the wedding? I imagined Brooke laughing, telling me about the venue or the colors she had chosen. Instead, it was Trevor's voice I heard, clipped and sharp, as if rehearsed. "We got married yesterday," he said. "We only invited special people." The words landed like a hammer blow. My hand clenched around the phone until the tendons in my knuckles ached. For a moment I thought I had misheard him, that the static of the line had twisted his meaning. But then came the silence after, the sort that confirms cruelty had been deliberate. Special people. I stood in the lumber aisle of Home Depot with a box of nails under my arm, staring at the polished floor as if it might split open and swallow me whole. I drove home without remembering the route, the world outside the windshield blurred by a film of disbelief. When I stepped into the cabin, the porch light glowed like always, but now it seemed foolish, a beacon that no one cared to follow. On the kitchen table lay the receipt from Mr. Patel's shop where, just last week, I had measured myself for a crisp blue shirt to wear on Brooke's big day. I had even thought of pairing it with the tie Linda gave me on our 25th anniversary. Now that shirt might as well have been burial clothing. The wedding had come and gone, and I was no part of it. I made the mistake of opening my phone. There they were, Brooke and Trevor in Charleston, framed against the harbor, champagne glasses lifted in a toast. Trevor's parents stood proudly on either side, dressed to the nines. Brooke wore a dress that glowed ivory in the autumn sun, her smile wide, her hand gripping Trevor's like an anchor. In one photo, she leaned toward her new in-laws, as if she had always belonged with them, not a trace of me anywhere. My thumb hovered, then tapped the heart icon beneath the picture. The gesture was hollow, a disguise. I liked the photo because I couldn't bear to show the world what I really felt, that I had been erased. My hand trembled as if I'd just carried a beam of oak across the shed, though all I carried now was shame. I wandered into the living room, where the manila envelopes sat stacked like bricks of quiet evidence. "Brooke, help," each one read in my handwriting. I pulled out a few at random. The down payment for the sedan, the grocery bills, the furniture from IKEA, proof of 3 years' worth of sacrifice, proof of my steady presence in her life. And yet, in the moment when vows were spoken, I wasn't even considered worthy of a chair in the back row. The stove fire sputtered low. Normally I would have risen to stir it, to keep the cabin warm through the night. Instead, I let the embers shrink into themselves. The chill creeping across the room mirrored the emptiness in my chest. For the first time in years, I didn't log into my bank account to transfer the rent money. I didn't remind myself of due dates or bills waiting. I sat still, watching the shadows climb the walls, realizing that silence could sometimes be stronger than obedience. I thought of Brooke as a child, running down the train platform toward me, her arms wide. That memory used to warm me. Now it burned, a reminder of how far we had drifted. She once thought I was the most important man in the world. Now, she had chosen to bind her life to someone else, and in the process, had locked me out entirely. The wind rattled the windows, carrying dry leaves across the porch. The sound was faint but insistent, like nature's own warning. Something had cracked inside me, a fault line I could no longer patch with money or excuses. I had believed my role as father was to provide endlessly, but now I understood that every dollar had bought me only distance. I turned off the phone, the images of the wedding burned into my mind. The night deepened around me, heavy with a silence that felt less like peace and more like judgment. Somewhere in that darkness, I knew a storm had begun, one that would test every bond left between me and the people I loved. I didn't yet know the shape of the battles ahead, but I felt the first tremor of a war that would no longer be fought with money, but with the truth of who I was and what I deserved. If you're still here and the story is pulling you in, drop number 2 in the comments to let me know you haven't looked away. I spread the manila envelopes across the kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle I had been too afraid to solve. Each one bore the same label in my hand: Brooke, help. For years I had slipped receipts inside and shut the flap, telling myself it was just part of being a father. That night, I pulled them open. The air smelled faintly of pencil shavings and coffee as I began writing figures down on a yellow pad. Rent first. $650 every month for 34 months, $22,100. I wrote the number, stared at it until the digits blurred. Next came the car insurance, $1,560. Then the apartment deposit, $1,300. The IKEA furniture, still in my memory, those endless hex keys and flat boxes, $1,980. Hospital bills for Trevor's late-night emergency room visit, $2,200. Groceries and extras, an estimate but close enough, $7,500. I totaled the columns, $36,640. The pencil left a deep groove in the paper when I underlined the sum. I leaned back and exhaled hard. That number was more than dollars. It was years of my life, chipped off retirement savings, carved from the nest egg Linda and I had built through sweat and long nights. Every figure carried a story. The car bill meant I had skipped a dental procedure. The groceries had taken the place of trips I'd promised myself. I realized I had been financing their adulthood while quietly bankrupting my own peace. The kitchen felt like a courtroom. I was both defendant and judge, listening as the case against myself grew stronger. The evidence was undeniable. I had let love become a transaction, believing each payment bought me a little bit of belonging. The verdict hit me in silence. Guilty of foolishness, of blindness, of trying to purchase affection that should have been given freely. I pushed the papers aside and stood. My legs felt heavy, but my chest strangely lighter, as if clarity had lifted a stone off my ribs. The next morning, I put on a clean flannel shirt and drove to Blue Mountain Bank. The branch smelled of fresh paint and the faint metallic tang of coins. I walked to the teller, a young woman with careful eyes. "I need to cancel all automatic transfers to my daughter's account," I said. She looked surprised. "Are you sure, Mr. Hale? Those have been steady for 3 years." I nodded. "Yes, cancel them. And change my authentication codes. No one else gets access." She tapped the keys, asked me to sign, and slid the papers across. My signature trembled at first, but by the second line it was firm. When she handed me the confirmation slip, I felt like a man who had finally shut a door he never should have opened. The drive home was quiet. The mountains stood tall against a pale sky, ridges etched like scars. I parked by the shed and listened to the silence. My phone buzzed inside the cabin. I ignored it, choosing instead to lay a plank of walnut across the saw table. The blade whined to life, steady and true. My hands guided the wood through, each cut sharp, each line exact. For the first time in months, the saw obeyed my touch without hesitation. It was as if strength had returned to me with the stroke of a pen at the bank. Later, sitting at the table, my phone lit up with a message. "Dad, you forgot the rent this month." The words dripped with assumption, not gratitude. I typed slowly, carefully. "I only help special people." Then I set the phone face down. The silence afterward was thick, but it was my silence, not theirs. Calls poured in. Trevor first, then Brooke, then numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all ring. I listened to the buzz, short and desperate, like a mosquito trapped against glass. When it stopped, I picked up my chisel and returned to the wood. The sound of steel meeting grain filled the room, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat finally keeping its own time. That night, the porch light glowed as always, but I looked at it differently. It wasn't a beacon for Brooke anymore. It was a reminder for me. A reminder that home still belonged to the man who built it, who had given and given, and who had finally chosen to stop. I knew storm clouds were gathering, that Trevor and Brooke would not accept the end of their easy lifeline without a fight. But for the first time in years, I felt ready. If you're still watching and can't believe how deep this wound goes, write number 3 below so I know you're following closely. The afternoon sun streamed through the small windows of my shed, laying golden stripes across the wood shavings on the floor. I was rubbing oil into the curve of a rocking chair armrest, coaxing out the deep glow of the walnut, when the sound of tires crunching on gravel reached my ears. I set down the rag, wiped my palms on my jeans, and stepped to the door. Brooke and Trevor were striding up the path, their expressions too carefully arranged to be casual. Trevor spoke first, his voice warm with false ease. "Walter, we thought we'd stop by. You've been under a lot of stress lately. Let us take some of that weight off your shoulders." His hand emerged from his jacket pocket, holding a manila folder. Even before he opened it, I sensed what was coming. He laid the papers on my workbench. "This is just a simple durable power of attorney. Nothing complicated. You'd stay in control, of course, but we'd be able to manage your accounts, pay bills on your behalf, keep things organized. It's really for your peace of mind." The pen he offered gleamed under the light. My fingers brushed against it out of habit, years of compliance urging me to sign first and think later. I turned the pen slowly between my fingers, my heart beat loud in my ears. Then I set it down with deliberate care. "Where was I the day of your wedding, Brooke?" She blinked, her gaze darting to the woodpile in the corner, then to the floor. "Dad, don't do this. You're making a big deal out of nothing. It was a small ceremony. You know how these things go." Her voice trailed off, thin and evasive. I felt the ache spread through my chest, heavier than anger, sharper than disappointment. "Nothing?" I asked softly. "The day a father waits his whole life for, and I was nothing?" The silence thickened. Trevor's smile cracked, and irritation slipped through. "You're being stubborn, Walter. We're offering to help you, and you're twisting it into some personal insult. You should be grateful we're willing to take responsibility." I walked to the shed door, pulled it open wide, and let the cool mountain air rush in. "This house doesn't sign papers when the heart's still broken," I said. My voice didn't shake, though I expected it might. Trevor's jaw tightened, the charm stripped away. Brooke pressed her lips together until they turned white, her eyes glistening with something caught between shame and loyalty to her husband. They stepped past me, leaving behind the heavy scent of Trevor's cologne and an invisible stain of tension. Gravel spat beneath their tires as they drove away, the sound lingering long after the car had gone. I stood in the doorway for a long while, the rocking chair unfinished behind me. The oil rag had dried in my hand, stiff as if it too carried the weight of what had just transpired. For the first time in years, I had not only withheld money, I had stood against them openly, face to face. The moment felt both terrifying and freeing. That evening, I walked down the hill into town. The church was quiet, except for the faint hum of the organ being practiced by a young volunteer. Pastor Elaine Ward sat in her office, the soft lamplight making her bookshelves glow. She listened as I poured out the story. Trevor's paperwork, Brooke's silence, my refusal. When I finished, she leaned forward, her eyes steady. "Walter, what you experienced is more common than people realize," she said. "It's called financial manipulation. They're trying to corner you with paperwork, hoping your love for Brooke will override your judgment. But love doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. You need someone who knows how to protect you legally." She slid a business card across the desk. "Aisha Patel. She's an attorney in Asheville who specializes in elder financial abuse. Call her." The card felt heavy in my pocket as I left the church, heavier than the pen I had refused to use earlier. On the walk home, the night air bit at my cheeks, and the stars were faint behind a veil of clouds. Yet, I felt a spark in my chest, a small fire that hadn't been there before. Back in the cabin, I picked up the phone and dialed. Aisha answered with a calm, professional tone. I explained enough for her to understand the urgency. She agreed to meet with me the following afternoon. Hanging up, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing, choosing to fight back with more than silence or withheld money. I sat in the rocker I had built months earlier, the wood smooth beneath my palms. The house was silent except for the wind pressing against the windows. It struck me that tonight had marked a turning point, not because my daughter had come with papers, but because I had refused to sign them. The war they were planning was becoming clearer, and I was ready to meet it, not with fear, but with resolve. If you're still here and the tension is keeping you hooked, type number 4 in the comments to show me you're staying with this journey. The morning started quietly, the way I liked it. A faint fog hugged the valley, and the kettle hissed on the stove. I had just poured myself a mug of coffee when the sound of tires grinding on gravel cut through the stillness. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck turning around, but then I heard car doors slam, more than one, followed by muffled voices. My stomach tightened. By the time I stepped into the hallway, the front door creaked open. They hadn't knocked. Brooke and Trevor walked in as if they owned the place, and trailing behind them was a man in a pressed gray suit carrying a briefcase. For a second, I froze, the sight of strangers inside my home pulling me back to the day I buried my wife, when everything had shifted without my consent. They were at my dining table. My envelopes, my bank statements, and a stack of letters I kept in a shoebox were spread across the wood, like evidence at a trial. Trevor leaned over them, pointing something out to the man. Brooke didn't look at me at first, just at the papers, her brow furrowed in false concern. "What in God's name are you doing?" I demanded. My voice was louder than I expected, echoing against the cabin walls. The man in the suit straightened, adjusting his tie. "Mr. Hale, my name is Robert Sloan. I'm a family law attorney. Your daughter and son-in-law have asked me to evaluate your situation. They're concerned about your ability to manage your financial affairs." The words hit harder than any blow. "Evaluate my situation?" I repeated slowly, struggling to keep the rage in check. "You're rifling through my private papers without my consent." Trevor's mouth tightened. "Dad, you've been acting irrational. Canceling transfers without warning, ignoring our calls, putting locks and cameras everywhere. It's not normal." Brooke finally met my eyes. Her voice was soft, almost tender, but the effect was worse. "You've been alone too long, Dad. Maybe you don't realize how confusing things have become for you." I laughed once, the sound sharp and humorless. "Confusing? I've never been clearer in my life. I see you for what you are, parasites who have mistaken my love for weakness." I strode to the table, snatched up the folder of papers Sloan had laid out, and without bothering to open it, dropped it straight into the trash can but pressed the hutch. The slam of the lid echoed through the room like a gavel. "That's where your schemes belong." Sloan's polished tone slipped into something colder. "Mr. Hale, I must warn you. If your children believe you're incapable of making sound financial decisions, they have the right to petition the court for guardianship. These matters often end with the appointment of a legal conservator." My chest burned with equal parts fury and grief. To think that my only child, the girl I carried on my shoulders through county fairs, would drag me into a courtroom to declare me incompetent. It hollowed me out. Still, I forced my voice steady. "You'll find no judge who thinks clarity is confusion. You'll find no law that forces me to bankroll two adults too lazy to stand on their own feet." Trevor stepped closer, his cologne thick and cloying. "You're making a mistake. Sign the papers, and we can smooth this over. Refuse, and it only gets uglier." I moved to the doorway and pointed. "Out, all of you. This is my house. You don't get to break in and threaten me under my own roof." Brooke's lips trembled. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw the little girl who once clung to my arm at train stations. But she said nothing, only pressed closer to Trevor. Together they walked toward the door, Sloan following with the stiffness of a man unused to losing ground. On the porch, Trevor turned back, his eyes hard. "This is going to end badly for you, Walter. You'll end up alone when you need someone most." I held his gaze, the silence between us louder than any reply. Then I closed the door, sealing them out. The cabin was still again, but it was no longer the peace of solitude. It was the aftermath of invasion. I looked at the table where my life had been spread open like an autopsy, and my knees nearly buckled. They weren't just after money anymore. They were after control, after my very right to live as myself. I sank into the rocker in the corner, gripping the armrests until my hands steadied. The silence wrapped around me, not comforting, but resolute. If they wanted a war, they would have won. But it would not be fought with signatures or submission. It would be fought with truth, with law, and with every ounce of strength I still carried in my bones. The storm rolled in not long after they left. Rain lashed against the cabin windows, and the wind pressed against the eaves like a warning. I sat in my rocker, unable to close my eyes. Every word Trevor had thrown at me replayed in my mind. You'll end up alone when you need someone most. The sentence clung to me like damp clothes. For hours I stared at the porch light flickering in the downpour, wondering if it was a sign. That light had always been for Brooke, a beacon telling her she was welcome. Now I wasn't sure if keeping it on meant I was still holding out hope, or if it only mocked me for refusing to let go. By morning, my body felt hollow from lack of sleep, but my mind was strangely clear. The envelopes on the table, the trashed legal papers, the silence of the house, they all pointed to one truth. I had a choice to make. I could surrender, sign whatever they shoved under my nose, and become a prisoner in my own home. Or I could choose myself for once, even if it meant standing alone. I picked up the card Pastor Elaine had given me the night before. Aisha Patel, attorney at law. I dialed the number with a hand that didn't shake. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm, deliberate. I explained briefly who I was and what had happened. When I mentioned the guardianship threat, her tone sharpened with recognition. She told me to come in that afternoon. Driving into Asheville, the mountains loomed dark and wet from the storm, but my chest felt lighter with each mile. Aisha's office was tucked into a brick building downtown, modest but professional. Diplomas lined the walls, and her desk was stacked with case files. She shook my hand firmly, the kind of handshake that tells you someone fights for a living. I laid everything out: the years of rent, the car payments, the groceries, the furniture, the hospital bills. I told her about the wedding I hadn't been invited to, about the folder in my trash, about Trevor's threats. She listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then, jotting notes with a pen that moved fast and sure. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Mr. Hale, what you've described is elder financial abuse," she said plainly. "It's more common than people think, and it often escalates to exactly what you're facing: guardianship petitions meant to strip people of their independence." The words both cut and comforted. Cut, because I realized I wasn't special in my suffering. Comforted, because it meant I wasn't losing my mind. Others had walked this road before. She laid out her plan in crisp steps. First, document everything. Every receipt, every transfer, every text message asking for money. Second, protect your assets. Change your bank accounts, reset your passwords, and install locks they don't have keys to. Third, prepare for court. If they file a petition, we'll have evidence to prove your competence and their financial motives. I swallowed hard. "I still love my daughter," I admitted quietly. "She's all I have left." Aisha's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "Love doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for her, is to stop enabling the abuse. Boundaries aren't rejection, they're survival." Her words sank deep, settling into the hollow places in me. I realized then that I couldn't cling to the version of Brooke I remembered from train platforms and bedtime stories. The woman standing beside Trevor yesterday was not that child anymore, and if I kept treating her like she was, I'd lose everything. "I'll fight," I said at last. My voice didn't shake. "I'm not signing away my life." Aisha nodded, sliding a representation agreement across the desk. I read every word before I signed, the pen firm in my grip. This signature felt different from the ones I had given to Brooke's endless requests. This one was for me. When I stepped back into the street, the rain had eased into a fine drizzle, The city smelled of wet pavement and roasted coffee from a cafe down the block. I tilted my face to the sky, feeling the drops cool against my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't just reacting. I had made a choice, a real one. As I drove home, the mountains seemed less like walls and more like guardians standing watch. The porch light still flickered when I pulled into the drive, but I didn't rush to fix it. Let it burn or let it die. I knew now that my life wasn't tied to whether Brooke came home. I had chosen myself. And whatever storm was coming next, I would face it not as a victim, but as a man determined to defend the life he had built. If you're still watching, and the choices ahead feel impossible, leave number 5 in the comments so I know you're standing strong with me. The days following my meeting with Aisha felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I finally had someone in my corner who knew the battlefield I was stepping onto. Heavier because the silence from Brooke and Trevor was too sharp, too calculated. It wasn't peace, it was the calm before a storm. I woke each morning with the same routine: coffee, radio, shed. But the air around the cabin felt charged, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. I put Aisha's advice into action. The first order of business was securing my home. I drove into town and bought a heavy-duty deadbolt and a chain lock, along with 2 new sets of keys. Installing them was almost ceremonial. As I drilled into the old wooden frame, the vibration ran up my arm, steady and purposeful, like I was reinforcing more than just wood and metal. I was fortifying my life. When I finished, I dropped the old keys into a jar, sealed it, and tucked it away in the back of my shed. No one but me would open this door again. Next came the bank. I walked into a different branch than the one I had used for decades, Blue Ridge Savings, and opened a new account under my name alone. Every dollar of my retirement, every cent from the sale of old railroad bonds, I moved there. Watching the teller confirm the transfer felt like setting stones in place across a river, each step carrying me further from the trap Brooke and Trevor had laid. Back at the cabin, I gathered every scrap of paper from the manila envelopes and began organizing them into binders. Rent transfers, car payments, grocery receipts, even birthday gifts. Each one tucked into a sleeve, labeled and dated. What once had been a monument to my blind generosity was now evidence. Aisha's voice echoed in my head. Documentation is your shield. For the first time, those envelopes didn't feel like chains. They felt like armor. Eleanor Briggs stopped by one morning carrying a thermos of coffee. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her eyes kind but sharp with a wisdom I had come to trust. She set the thermos on the table and sat across from me without ceremony. "You've been quiet," she said. "I've been busy." I gestured to the binders spread out before me. She nodded slowly, then told me her own story, about her son who had drained her finances for years, promising repayment that never came. One day she stopped, and the silence nearly broke her. But months later, he returned, not asking for money, but offering an apology. "I don't know if Brooke will ever do that," she admitted. "But I know this. You're not alone, Walter. You're doing what many of us have had to do. It hurts, but it saves you." Her words struck something deep. I felt grief rising in my chest. Grief not just for the betrayal, but for the realization that the daughter I thought I had might never come back. I mourned her in silence that evening, staring at the picture of Linda on the mantel, whispering that I was sorry, for the mistakes, for not being strong sooner, for letting love blind me so long. 2 afternoons later, I spotted Trevor's car at the far edge of my property. The engine idled, exhaust curling into the cold air. He didn't approach the cabin, didn't knock or shout. He just sat there, staring. The sight chilled me more than any words could have. It was intimidation without sound, a predator waiting. My first instinct was to storm outside and demand answers, but I remembered Aisha's instructions. Don't confront. Don't escalate. Document everything. So I pulled out the notebook I kept by the door and wrote the time, the make and model of the car, the duration he sat there. By the time I returned to the window, the car was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel. But I didn't feel powerless. Instead, I felt something new, empowered by the act of turning fear into evidence. That night, I sat by the window with the lamp glowing softly beside me. Rain began to fall, streaking down the glass like a veil. I thought of Brooke, of the little girl who once believed I could fix anything. Now she saw me as broken, disposable, replaceable. The pain was sharp, but beneath it ran a strange steadiness. I might lose her forever, but I had gained something I hadn't felt in decades: control over my own life. The silence stretched long into the night. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the sound of two sides preparing for the next move. And I knew, deep in my bones, that Brooke and Trevor weren't finished. The quiet wasn't retreat. It was planning. They were gathering something bigger, something meant to crush me. But I had my binders, my locks, my lawyer, and the clarity I'd been missing all these years. Whatever they were building, I would meet it head on. The morning after Trevor's car appeared at the edge of my property, I awoke with a knot in my chest. Anger stirred under my ribs, but so did something else, a thin thread of determination. Fear alone wouldn't keep me safe, and neither would anger. If I wanted to survive this storm with my dignity intact, I had to move deliberately, step by step, just as I had when building a shed or laying track years ago. I called Aisha Patel first thing. Her voice was steady as ever, though sharper when I told her about Trevor idling at my property line. "That's intimidation," she said plainly. "Keep logging everything. Every car, every call, every word. If this escalates further, we'll pursue a temporary restraining order." Hearing her speak with such certainty steadied me. She reminded me that what felt like chaos could be turned into evidence, and evidence was something courts understood. By noon, I drove into town. At a hardware store, I met a local installer named Mason who specialized in home security systems. Together, we loaded motion lights, cameras, and new wiring into the back of my truck. That afternoon, he and his assistant walked to the perimeter of my cabin, marking spots for sensors and lights. The sight of wires stretching along the eaves and cameras swiveling into place gave me an odd comfort. It wasn't just technology, it was a statement. This house was no longer open ground. I also changed my phone number. Only 2 people got it, Aisha and Eleanor. I felt lighter when I pressed the button that disconnected me from the old line, the one Brooke had filled with demands, guilt, and silence. I didn't want to hear Trevor's voice again unless it was through the filter of a courtroom. That evening, Eleanor appeared at my door with a loaf of bread still warm from the oven. She handed it over without a word and followed me to the kitchen table. We sat together, steam rising from slices we cut and buttered. "You're different," she said after a while. "Stronger somehow." "I don't feel stronger," I admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my daughter for good." Eleanor touched my arm gently. "You might lose the version of her you wanted. But maybe that's not the daughter who truly exists now. You have to think about your future, Walter, not just the past you're mourning." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, sleep came hard, and when it did, I dreamed of Linda. I woke before dawn with a heaviness I couldn't shake until I knew where I had to go. By mid-morning, I was at the cemetery, standing in front of Linda's grave. The grass was damp, the stone worn smooth by years of weather. I knelt, placing fresh flowers on the earth, and whispered what I hadn't been able to say aloud since she passed. "I'm sorry, Linda. I let them use me. I thought giving meant loving. I should have remembered what you always told me. Respect comes first." My throat tightened, but as the words left me, I felt a kind of release, as though she had heard and forgiven me. When I rose, the air felt lighter. Leaving the cemetery, I carried not just grief, but a vow. I would not let anyone strip me of the life Linda and I had built. Back at the cabin, I opened a blank notebook. This time, instead of recording their demands, I wrote my own words. Not just the numbers and receipts, but my story, who I was, what I valued, why I refused to be erased. I wanted the court to see me not as some frail old man, but as a capable, clear-headed husband, father, and worker who had simply drawn a line. That evening, as I placed the finished pages beside my binders of receipts, I heard the mail truck rumble away. On the porch sat a thick official envelope stamped from the county courthouse. My hands didn't shake when I picked it up. Inside was the notice I had known would come. Brooke and Trevor had filed for guardianship. I set the envelope down carefully on the table, next to the binders and my statement. The silence of the cabin wrapped around me, but I didn't feel small within it. For the first time, I looked at a threat not with trembling, but with readiness. The battle had come to my door, yes, but I was no longer the man who caved in silence. I was the man who kept records, who built walls, who knew exactly what he stood to lose, and what he refused to give away. If you're still here and the fight for freedom grips you, type number 6 below to let me know you're walking this path alongside me. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and cold, the mountains veiled in low clouds. I woke before the alarm, nerves rattling my chest. The cabin was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, and I realized the next few hours would decide not just where my money went, but whether I would remain master of my own life. I shaved carefully, buttoned my best black suit, and polished the shoes I hadn't worn in years. When I looked in the mirror, the man staring back was lined and weathered, but steady. I whispered to myself, "You are not broken. You are not theirs." At the courthouse in Asheville, the marble steps felt heavier than steel rails. Aisha met me at the entrance, her eyes calm, her folder thick with documents. Eleanor was already inside, sitting in the gallery with a small nod of encouragement. Their presence steadied me more than words ever could. When Brooke and Trevor entered, they looked like actors on stage. Brooke wore a navy dress, her hair pinned neatly, eyes already glistening with rehearsed tears. Trevor's suit was crisp, his jaw set in a mask of concern. Behind them, their attorney, Robert Sloan, moved with the confidence of a man who believed the case was already won. The judge entered, and the room stilled. Proceedings began with Sloan's opening statement. He painted me as a man unraveling, cutting off financial transfers irrationally, installing security systems due to paranoia, withdrawing from family under the influence of strangers. He called Brooke and Trevor devoted children trying to protect the father slipping into confusion. Brooke testified first. She dabbed at her eyes as she told the court how I had become hostile and unrecognizable. "He won't answer my calls anymore," she said, voice trembling. "He's isolated himself. I'm afraid he's being manipulated." Her tears fell in neat patterns, but I saw no sorrow in them, only calculation. Trevor followed, his tone steady, almost patronizing. He claimed my decision to cancel the rent transfers showed instability. He presented photos of the cameras and locks I had installed, twisting them into symbols of paranoia. "We only want him safe," he insisted, as though safety came with surrender. Sloan leaned into their narrative, arguing I was no longer fit to handle my own affairs. "Guardianship is not punishment," he said smoothly. "It is protection." Then it was Aisha's turn. Her voice cut through the courtroom like clear water. She asked Brooke one simple question. "When was the last time you called your father without asking for money?" Brooke stammered, unable to give a date. Aisha pressed further. "Is it true you excluded your father from your wedding? Is it true you told him only special people were invited?" Brooke flushed red, eyes darting to Trevor. When Trevor took the stand again under cross-examination, Aisha dismantled his facade. She presented my binders, each receipt dated and organized. "Do these look like the records of a confused man?" she asked the court. Trevor shifted, mumbling. One by one, our witnesses came forward. Eleanor testified that she had spent countless evenings with me, discussing books and life with full clarity. The hardware installer confirmed I had hired him with precise instructions and paid in full. Even the pharmacist explained how Trevor and Brooke had twisted his words, clarifying that I had no erratic medication history. Finally, it was my turn. Walking to the witness stand, I felt every eye on me, but I did not tremble. I spoke slowly, carefully. I told the judge about the $36,000 I had given them, about the years of rent and groceries, about the day I discovered I was not welcome at my own daughter's wedding. "I stopped giving," I said, "because I finally realized what I was buying wasn't love. It was dependence, and it was destroying me." Sloan tried to rattle me, suggesting my friendships with Eleanor and others were manipulations, but I answered each question clearly. "I choose my friends," I said firmly, "just as I choose not to be used." When testimony ended, the judge retreated to his chambers. 2 hours felt like 2 days. At last he returned, his expression grave but clear. He spoke slowly, each word striking like a hammer. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, this court finds no basis to declare Mr. Walter Hale incompetent. Psychiatric evaluations confirm he is fully capable of managing his affairs. His financial records demonstrate responsibility, not decline. The petition for guardianship is denied. The air left my lungs in a rush. Across the room, Brooke's face crumpled, while Trevor's jaw clenched with fury. Sloan gathered his papers stiffly, already looking for his next client. Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time all day. Aisha clasped my shoulder. "You fought with dignity, Walter. You won." Eleanor hugged me briefly, her eyes glistening with relief. As Brooke and Trevor walked away down the courthouse steps, their backs rigid, I realized something final had passed between us. They had lost more than a case. They had lost the right to call themselves family. I stood on the steps a long moment, breathing in the cool mountain air. My freedom was intact, my dignity restored. Whatever lay ahead, it would be mine to decide. Weeks passed after the court's decision, and with each day I felt the weight of fear and doubt loosen its grip on me. The cabin that once felt like a battleground grew lighter, as though the walls themselves sighed in relief. For the first time in years, I woke without bracing for a phone call, a demand, or a knock on the door. Freedom didn't arrive in one grand moment. It seeped in slowly, like sunlight returning after a long storm. I made changes, real ones. The first was practical. I sold a small piece of land I no longer had use for, and with the proceeds, I bought a modest house closer to town. It wasn't grand, but it was bright, with wide windows that welcomed the morning sun. I wanted a place that wasn't haunted by memories of slammed doors and tense visits. Moving felt like turning a page, and for once the chapter ahead was mine to write. With Aisha's help, I also redirected my money. I donated a portion to a local nonprofit that supported seniors facing financial abuse. Writing that check felt like more than charity. It felt like planting seeds in soil I wished had been ready for me years earlier. Knowing someone else might find help before the trap closed around them gave meaning to my scars. The rest I kept carefully guarded. New accounts, strict boundaries, no more secrets. Money that once slipped through my fingers at the first whimper of need now stayed where it belonged, supporting my life, not sustaining someone else's laziness. I returned to hobbies I had long abandoned. The smell of sawdust filled my new garage workshop, where I carved rocking chairs and small tables. My hands remembered the rhythm, and each piece of wood I shaped felt like reclaiming a part of myself. On weekends, I tended a small garden in the backyard, coaxing tomatoes, beans, and herbs from the soil. Watching green shoots push up through the earth reminded me that growth was still possible, even after years of neglect. Community, too, became something I welcomed again. Eleanor often stopped by, sometimes with a casserole, sometimes with nothing but stories. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women and men who had faced their own betrayals but emerged wiser. They accepted me without judgment, and with them, I learned family could be chosen, not inherited. Laughter returned to my evenings, the kind that rattled the windows and loosened the cobwebs in my soul. News of Brooke and Trevor reached me in pieces. Neighbors mentioned they had moved into a smaller apartment outside the city. Trevor, for the first time in his life, was working long shifts. Brooke had taken part-time jobs. Their once smug confidence had given way to struggle. I felt no glee in hearing it, only a quiet acceptance. Life has a way of teaching lessons that courts cannot. They had learned the value of money the hard way, though I doubted they had learned the value of love. What surprised me most was how little I missed them. For so long, I believed my survival depended on their presence, even when that presence was corrosive. But in the quiet evenings on my new porch, coffee steaming in my hand, I realized I had gained more than I had lost. I no longer measured my worth in dollars handed over or in crumbs of affection. I measured it in peace of mind, in freedom, in the respect I finally showed myself. I often thought of Linda during those sunsets. I imagined her sitting beside me, smiling as the horizon flamed orange and pink. I liked to believe she was proud, not because I had fought a legal battle and won, but because I had finally understood the lesson she'd tried to teach me long ago. Love is not something you buy. Dignity is not something you surrender. The journey had been brutal, but it revealed something I didn't know I still had. Strength. Strength to say no, strength to stand in court, strength to build a new life brick by brick. I carried scars, yes, but they were proof I had survived, not proof I was broken. As I sat on the porch one evening, the world hushed around me. I let my mind settle on a simple truth. Family may betray you, money may blind you, and love may disguise itself as dependence. But in the end, the one person you must choose to love and protect above all else is yourself. I sipped my coffee, let the air cool against my face, and smiled. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for Brooke to call. I wasn't waiting for permission to live. The silence around me was no longer loneliness, it was peace. And peace, I realized, is worth more than any inheritance, any approval, any fleeting affection. Peace is freedom, and freedom, once reclaimed, is never too expensive. Life often has a way of stripping away illusions until only the truth remains. It is in those moments of loss, betrayal, and painful awakening that the deepest lessons reveal themselves. One of the hardest truths to accept is that love without respect is not love at all. When care becomes conditional, when affection is measured by what can be given rather than who one is, then what exists is not a bond but a transaction. And transactions can drain the soul until there is nothing left but regret. Yet there is another truth, one that waits patiently behind the wreckage of disappointment. Dignity is never a gift someone else can bestow. It is a birthright. To live with dignity requires boundaries, even when those boundaries mean stepping away from those closest by blood. Sometimes the most courageous act is not to keep giving, but to finally say no, to choose self-preservation over appeasement, to defend the life one has built with sweat and sacrifice. Freedom, too, is not always found in wide-open spaces or in grand victories. It is often discovered quietly, in the decision to reclaim control, in the courage to stop explaining, in the steady belief that one's worth does not hinge on anyone else's approval. Freedom lives in the silence that is no longer heavy with fear, but filled with peace. It lives in the understanding that being alone can be far healthier than being surrounded by people who only see value in what you provide. The deeper lesson is this: life will test whether we value ourselves enough to guard our own hearts, our own time, and our own resources. It will demand that we weigh the cost of peace against the cost of pleasing others. And in the end, the balance always tips toward peace, because peace is the soil where joy, creativity, and renewal grow. To walk away from manipulation is not abandonment. It is an act of love for oneself. To reclaim autonomy is not selfish. It is survival. And to stand firm in the truth that respect must accompany love is to finally step into the kind of freedom that no one can steal. The journey is never easy, but once taken, it changes everything. For only when dignity is preserved and freedom is claimed can life be lived fully, honestly, and without fear. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.